Hi everyone, my name's Mallory. Welcome to my channel. I'm so happy that you're here today. Today I'm going to be doing a little tour of my at-home library. I love when my favorite YouTubers post videos like this so I can see what they have in their collection and so that I can almost see how they have decided to lay out their space. And I have only recently been able to create a space like this. When I was living in an apartment or living at home, I didn't really have a space like this, and it was always kind of a dream of mine to have an area just dedicated to books and reading. So I'm really excited to share that with you all today. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a little bit of the room itself, and then we'll talk about some of the specific sections and how I have everything arranged. And then I'm also going to share some of the things that I find essential in this room when I sit down to read. What is it that I'm grabbing and need to have to make this a cozy space for my reading? Let's go. Right away when you walk into this room, the first thing you will probably notice is that there is a lot of stuff. I have not only shelves and shelves of books, but also lots of stacks and piles of books. These two shelves house a majority of the books that I own. I also have another shelf that you're going to be seeing in a minute that has some of my nonfiction and even some of my favorite books on it. I also have a lot of piles and stacks of books because I would love to get one more shelf but don't have space for it right now. I also have a lot of book-related artwork hanging up in this room. I love this Swing Into Books poster. I think it is so cute. I also have this Peter Pan print that has words from the story printed onto the background of the paper. One of the other pieces of art that I have in here is a signed poster from one of my absolute favorite musical artists. Her name is Wise Blood, and I think that this poster just fits the vibe perfectly of this room. I also have some other books and decor around with some of my favorite things like Winnie the Pooh, and I have this picture of my cat. I love little flowery things, and so you'll see that I have a lot of flowered, themed, and printed items throughout this entire room as well. Lastly, no reading room is complete without a comfy chair to sit in. I love sitting in this chair, propping my feet up on this little stool, and chilling out to read. These shelves right here house some of my most favorite books in my collection. So up here I have all of my Sarah J. Maas books, a series that really kickstarted me back into reading after taking quite a long break was the ACOTAR series. I really got into the ACOTAR series during COVID, and every single one that has come out, I have just eaten it up. I know a lot of people on social media also really like it. It was just one of those things that got me excited about reading after I had been in a really long reading slump. I'm also really excited to read the Crescent City series and the Throne of Glass series, as I've heard it is some of her absolute best work. And Sarah J. Maas is definitely one of my auto-buy authors now. I have loved every book that I've read from her. I also have a couple other fantasy books on this shelf that I haven't read yet, but I'm excited to get to. And it kind of bleeds into another shelf that I have over here, where this houses most of my other fantasy books. I read a lot of fantasy and romantasy books, so this section of my library is full. It's probably my most read genre, so it takes up about 4 shelves worth of space in my collection. Another special area that I have is my Caraval series collection. I fell in love with this series when I was reading it last year, and now I am really excited to read a lot more of the books in Stephanie Garber's collection. I recently ordered the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, and I'm excited to get into that next. Another shelf of fantasy books is kind of a display shelf to show off a few of my favorite series. I have a nice collection here of the Hunger Games books. It really bothers me because one of the books doesn't have the dust jacket to it anymore. I think when I was younger and reading it, I was very much into getting rid of the dust jacket, which I am kind of kicking myself for now. But I'm glad to have this whole collection. I've been debating buying the Hunger Games original book in a hardback so it matches the rest, but haven't done that. I also got the Hunger Games special editions, which I think are really beautiful, and I wanted to find a good way to display them. I'm not super satisfied with the way that it looks right now, but I am really glad that I can still house those on this shelf. I also have the Fourth Wing series. Fourth Wing was another book that really brought me back into reading after I had been in a major slump. I really loved that book, and the whole rest of the series has a really special spot in my heart. I don't have my copy of Onyx Storm here because it's currently lent out to a friend, but the way that I have it arranged, I wanted to showcase some of the really cool sprayed edges with the dragons. So I've got those paperback copies of Fourth Wing and Iron Flame kind of in the middle, sandwiched between the hardbacks. Two series that I recently really began loving is the Phantasma and Enchantra books by Kaylee Smith. I know that there's going to be more in that series. She has not released what the names are or when those are coming out, but I absolutely love both of those books. When I read them, I read both of them super fast, especially Phantasma. I think maybe I even read that in a day. I was absolutely obsessed. I love the characters. The way that she writes the story is done in a really cool way, and it's a really unique book. It's not like one I've ever read before. I recently talked about Enchantra in my mid-year wrap-up video, so if you're curious to learn more about that book, feel free to check out that video. I also have the two books in the Letters of Enchantment duology, Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows. Divine Rivals was one of my favorite books that I read last year. It might have even been my favorite book that I read last year. I really like Rebecca Ross's writing style, and the way that she builds her characters really makes you feel like you can get to know them. She has another book coming out soon. I believe it's called Alchemy of Secrets, and I'm really excited to read that one when it drops. I also have two shelves pretty much completely dedicated to romance books. Not only do I read a lot of fantasy, but I'd say the other main genre that I read is romance. And over here I have my Elle Kennedy collection. She is kind of the one that got me into reading romances. I read the Deal and the rest of the Off Campus series so fast, and that really kickstarted a love for romance books, specifically sports romance books. So I have quite a few of those. A series from her that I haven't read yet, but I'm excited to get into is the Briar U series. I've heard really great things about that. Then over on the side over here, I have all of my Ali Hazelwood books. And if you have followed me on Instagram or have been watching my videos, you would know that I love Ali Hazelwood. She is probably my favorite romance author. Another situation of I feel like I'm able to get to know the characters. The stories to me maybe aren't the most realistic. That's kind of a criticism that some of my friends have given, but I like that. I like it to be a lighthearted, cheesy romance where I know the formula. I pretty much know that XYZ will happen, but I still never get old. It still never gets old. I never get tired of it. I also have a couple other books on this shelf that if I could put them somewhere else, I would, because it doesn't really go with either of those authors, but I'm running out of room, and so I had to put them on there. So there's a couple standalones, there's a couple books that I am excited to get to that I know are in a series, but I just don't own any other books in the series. My other romance shelf has a couple series on it as well. I have the Hannah Grace books. I really enjoyed reading Icebreaker and Wildfire, and I need to read Daydreams still. I have it and I just haven't picked it up yet. I also have been getting into the Chestnut Springs series by Elsie Silver, and I have those right here as well. All of the books on this side are kind of in a similar color scheme. There's a few here and there that don't really go with it, but I do try to keep the aesthetics there. I don't really love when things are just shoved in different places unless it has to be because I have absolutely no room. So I kind of try to organize it in a way that is still appealing. A lot of my books that are not in display mode are organized by last name of author. I also have a couple Ellen Hildenbrand books over here. I read The Hotel Nantucket a few years ago and really enjoyed that. It was a perfect summertime read, and I've read a couple other things by her. I don't own a lot of her books, but I have a few others. I also have some series by Jenny Han. So I have To All the Boys I've Loved Before and The Summer I Turned Pretty series. I would love to do a reread of The Summer I Turned Pretty series, especially because of the TV show that has recently come out in the past couple of years. I'd like to watch that, but I don't want to watch it until I have reread the books. This shelf here is a mix of a couple different things. I have some thrillers, I have some YA, I have some mysteries, and I have a little bit of the start of my general fiction section. I have these all kind of mixed together on this shelf because I don't have a wide collection of those genres, and so just the best organization I could do was to put them all together. I also don't really own a lot of physical copies of mysteries or thrillers. I tend to prefer to read a lot of those on my Kindle. I think because it's a book genre that I don't typically reread. If I buy a book in the physical copy, it's typically something that I'm either going to want to reread, or it's a book I really love that I just want to own in my collection, or it's from an author or a series that I really love or have a special edition of. And for me, I don't reread a lot of mystery or thriller books because I already will know how they end. So I really only have a few mystery books. I have The One of Us Is Next and One of Us Is Lying. I have those because I had bought those when I was younger. I also have The Silent Patient, The Maidens, The Fury by Alex Michaelides because that is probably my favorite or one of my favorite mystery thriller authors. So those three are in my collection because I like his writing so much. I also have a few YA books, including some books by Gary Schmidt, who is maybe my favorite YA and children's author. I think that he is such a master storyteller, and so my collection would not be complete if I didn't have some of his books on my shelf. Like I said, I also have the start of my general fiction, and it goes onto another shelf because it would not all be able to fit on one specific shelf. You'll see that everything is kind of stacked up in different piles. A few books on this shelf that I am really anticipating reading is The Great Alone and The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I've heard a lot of buzz regarding how beautiful her books are, and so I'm excited to get to those. I knew that I would want to have those as physical copies on my shelf. I also have a lot of books that I have purchased from library sales on this one. I don't read a lot of general fiction, and so this is a shelf that I am not often grabbing things off of, but would love to have a little bit more motivation to grab from. The bottom shelf of this bookshelf is my entire Book of the Month collection. I love getting Book of the Month in the mail, but I am so bad at picking them up to read it, and I've only read a couple books on this shelf. I really enjoyed The Favorites and A Song to Drown Rivers. I loved those two. I also recently finished Silver Elite, and I got that in Book of the Month as well. The second half of the bottom shelf is my graphic novel collection, and this is one that I have enjoyed adding to over the years. It houses a couple of my favorite series of all time, to be honest. I really love the Lore Olympus series. I love any Persephone and Hades story retelling, so this one is really awesome. It's engaging and the pages are so beautiful. I also really love the Heartstopper series. This one will get you in your feels. I loved reading about Charlie and Nick's story. I've loved all 5 of those so far. I also have this really cool collection of the Saga series. I haven't read all of these, but they're also a really cool fantasy graphic novel series, if that's something that you love. And here's something that I love. The final thing that I wanted to mention is what I have on top of this bookshelf. I have 3 series that I loved when I was younger. I have a series by Melanie Dickerson of different retellings of classic princess fairy tales. On the far right, I have the Little House on the Prairie series. This is one of those ones that I really enjoyed reading as a kid. And then I also have the Sisters Grimm series, which I was completely obsessed with this as a kid. I'm dying to know if anyone else read this series. It's where these 2 sisters go into different fairy tales and they have to solve mysteries and they go on these different adventures. I really loved those too. And then yes, here again is that princess series. There are some of these that I haven't even read yet, and I'm really looking forward to it because I feel like it's just going to transport me back into my childhood when I was so engaged in reading this series. Maybe you saw this other shelf during my overview of the room. These all are my husband's books. I'm super envious of the amount of shelf space that he has with that. I wish that I could just take it for myself. All of the books on the top shelf of this bookshelf are books that are either currently lent out to me, which I have on the end over here, or they are books that are really important and special to me. Some of my top books of all time, my top favorites. So I love to be able to have those on display. Some of the series that I have really enjoyed would be things like the Scott Pilgrim graphic novel series. This is a book series that I don't often see recommended. It is something though that I would highly recommend. I have the color hardcover editions of that series. I think they're just so cool. And if you've seen the Scott Pilgrim movie, then maybe you have experienced how fun the series is. I would say that the graphic novel versions are just as fun, or in some ways maybe even a little bit more fun than the movie. The movie though is a really great adaptation of the series and the content in there. I also have some books here that have made a really big impact in my life. One of those books would be Lord of the Flies. I like to collect some different editions of that. I remember reading that book when I was in 8th grade, and it really blew my mind that there was a story that existed like that. I think that it's such an important book and even really tells important messages for the time that we're currently living in. Another really important book to me is A Walk to Remember. That might be the first more adult romance that I read, I checked it out from my high school library and they were going to get rid of it, and so I ended up snagging that one. It is such an emotional, heartfelt story. It's one that I've come back to several times and it still moves me so deeply every time that I read it. A few other books up here that I really love that have been introduced to me through a school setting would be The Outsiders. That is a book that I feel like everyone has to read when they're in high school. The Book Thief is another one that really made me emotional and impacted me when I read it in high school. I think that is such a unique book. I also really love the book To Kill a Mockingbird, and so those three classics have to be on this shelf. Maybe a modern day classic that I would say is Wonder. That story is also really cool, but it's kind of a more modern or nowadays type story. It wasn't around when I was younger, but I always recommend it to the young people in my life. Another book that I really love is Coraline, and that's another one where if you've seen the movie, then you know how awesome that story is. The movie is so cool and also does a really good job of telling that story. I think the movie is so unique, and honestly, if you haven't seen it, then I 100% recommend that one. On this shelf, I have a few more special edition books that are really special to me, like Jane Eyre and Pride and Prejudice. I also have really been getting into the C.S. Lewis Chronicles of Narnia series. So I have this really cool vintage set that my husband gave me a couple years ago as a gift. I also have some books about the Bronte sisters because when I was in high school, I really started to get into the Brontes and Jane Austen. I also hope you saw that really awesome collector's edition of Red Queen. I love that book. I also have some poetry books, some nonfiction books on the other shelves in this bookshelf. This is a genre that, if you know me, you know I don't come to often. It's something that I'm always striving to get to a little bit more, and so I've been trying to really get into some of these books that I have on here. I have chosen a few that I'd like to read before some of the others, so I'm hoping that I will get to them soon. Last but not least, I have to be honest and show my disorganized piles. I have some books over here that are in my TBR, a lot of books that I have recently purchased and have yet to find a spot for. So maybe I will try to put them on some of those shelves in little pockets of space that I have, but most likely they'll probably stay in this bad pile until I'm able to read them. Before I sign off, I wanted to share with you some of my essentials for when I sit down to read in my reading room. There are a couple different things that I find essential to have when I sit down to read. The first thing is you have to have something to read. Maybe it's a physical book or something on a Kindle. I also like to read with headphones. Sometimes I like to listen to music. I also usually have this book bow pillow. I think this is so comfy to prop my book up on my lap. Last thing, you need to have something delicious to drink, and you might also want to grab a comfy blanket. Then you are ready to go. I hope that you have enjoyed this little tour of my home library, and I hope that you enjoyed hearing a little bit more about what I use to sit down for a good reading session, and also how I organize my shelves. It's really fun to be able to show off some of the books that I own, and I would love to hear more about the books that you think I should add to my collection. Thank you again for watching. I hope that you will like this video and that you'll subscribe to stick around for some more bookish content. And now I've got my blanket, I've got my pillow, and I've got my book, and I'm gonna start reading.